Hello subscribers. I wanted to make an announcement today and talk about a game I'm working on. It's called Fortaeverse. It's a very complex multiplayer text-based RPG. It will have some graphics, but it'll be pretty minimal and it'll be two-dimensional. It will also have some sound, but for the most part it's just going to be very complex role-playing game elements to it. Think Darklands combined with wizardry, and you might have a little bit of an idea what it's going to be like. So anyway, I'll just read here what I've created on the home page, the plot of the game. So the universe has been created and manipulated by the gods for their own entertainment and experiments. No one knows how the gods achieved this, whether it was advanced knowledge of physics, a virtual machine simulation, etc. Regardless, you are a participant. You can control 5 parties, each having up to 6 party members. And of course, that's up for debate. That's just what I'm planning on doing right now. While some familiar laws of physics still apply, there are times when they seem to be broken, i.e. manipulated. For example, the gods have created magic and other various dimensions. The laws of thermodynamics still apply, although one may be unaware that energy is sometimes being harnessed or converted from the various dimensions. Also, the gods love manipulating time, so every 1 second of time as we know it in the real world results in 2 seconds passing in-game. And finally, while time still has a relative aspect related to matter, it doesn't follow the theory of relativity as we know it. Various actions and dimension usage results in accelerated or reversed aging of matter. There is no way to time travel, but there may be witnessed acceleration or deceleration at times. So I have the database created for the majority of the game and structures, and I'm just going to log in and show you a little bit. So I have a party that I'm going to be creating, but I haven't created any party members yet. And like I said, I'm planning on having it where you can have 6 characters in a given party, plus you may be able to have some non-player characters join your party. I like how Bard's Tale 2 did that, where you could have these monsters and things in your party that you can't normally, play as a player character, but you can still have them. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is show you just a few of the options, because it's quite vast. So of course you pick your sex and your race, and I have a lot of races. Let me just show you some of them that I haven't seen in other games that I think would be kind of cool. So an Ant-Man, a Badgerling, which of course is basically a badger type man, a Batkin, which is like a Batman, not the superhero, but a man that's part bat. A Becan, which is part bee. Of course, all of these are humanoids. I should have mentioned that. Basically, all player characters are required to be some form of humanoid. But again, non-player characters can probably be any kind of monster as long as they have intelligence and want to adventure with your party. So we have things like bugbears, drakens, of course all the typical dwarf elf setup. A foxling, which is part fox. Frogling, that's obvious. A frogman. Gnolls, gnomes, goblins, halflings. And there's some other ones that I've been researching based on mythology, and I will talk about those in more depth later as I introduce more to the game. But there's other things that you can probably work out just based on the name, like Hawkeye is part hawk. Mantis, which would be a mantis man, like praying mantis. Minotaur, Mongoosian, which is obviously a mongoose man. As you can see, it just keeps on going, the list. Now some of them I'm planning on changing a little bit, like a salamander can imply various things, but in my game the salamander is basically going to be a lizard type creature that has fire type abilities of some kind, but it's not like the salamander in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it's not like the salamander in real life. Scorp is a scorpion type man. Of course, Snake Man. Tigra is essentially a tiger man. And when I'm saying man, of course you can be female too. Troll, Warg, Wook, Yaksha. There's quite a bit, as you can tell. Now, each of these will have certain advantages and disadvantages, not only for attributes, but for native abilities, resistances, and things of that nature. Now, for vocations, I have greatly expanded character classes and professions compared to other games I've played. So some of these you're going to be familiar with, like Alchemist, but there'll be others like Animal Hunter, Apothecary, Aristocrat. So as you can tell, based on some of those names, this game doesn't have to be all about fighting. Now, if you want to do a lot of fighting, that's fine. It's your world that you're going to be in. You're just sharing it with everybody else, but still, you're going to be able to play the way you want to play this game. But if you're more into trades and negotiating and things of that nature, you may want to be something like Aristocrat. Or maybe an artifact hunter who tries to discover magical treasures and deal with those. I have an artificer who can actually create magical artifacts. I always thought that would be awesome to have in a game where you could actually create things from various magical properties and effects. Well, I'm putting that in here. Assassins, Barbarians, Bard, Bishop, all those are familiar. Bounty Hunter, maybe you want to do quests which involve rescuing or perhaps finding a villain and bringing him back for money. Craftsman, if you just like to create things and work on grinding that type of mechanism. Diplomat, Druid, Enchanter, and I have all kinds of magic vocations. I'm using the word vocation because it's more generic than class and profession, because in reality, some of these you can't make any money, and profession makes it sound like you're doing it for money. Well, some of these are not being done for money, obviously. It's just the interest of the person, and they don't need the money for whatever reason. I will discuss the differences in the magic classes later, but there's quite a bit, and there's a lot of magic realms. Kind of borrowed the idea from how wizardry does that, but I've expanded on it. Of course, fighter types like Knight, Mercenary, Merchants, Miners, Monks, Myrmidons, Necromancer, Ninja, Paladin, Pirate, Priest, Psionic, Ranger, Rogue, Sage, who's basically a wise man who can improve aspects of the party related to performing various actions. I'll talk about that at some point in the future. Samurai, Scientist, Scout, and there's going to be a lot with scouting and discovering areas in this game. There'll be many different ways to do it, but it's going to be quite different than any game that I've played. I'm not sure if there's any out there similar to what I'm planning on doing here, but I'll discuss that later. Scribe, who's good at crafting either magic scrolls or reading them, invoking them, things of that nature. Shaman, Swashbuckler, Thaumaturgist, Thief, which is different than the Rogue. The Thief, your intention is to actually steal, whereas the Rogue, it can be any kind of roguish type activities. Tinkerer, think of them as similar to the Gadgeteer in Wizardry 8. Treasure Hunter, which is different than the Artifice Hunter. The Treasure Hunter is more about the money that you get from the treasure, whereas the Artifact Hunter is more about the fame and prestige and trying to find unique type artifacts. Trickster, which essentially is someone that likes to do sleight of hand type things. in order to trick people or make illusions, things of that nature. Valkyrie, a warlord, who essentially is kind of like a leader in war situations or battles. Talk about them later. Then we have warrior and wizard. And I'm not a fan of the term fighter, because anybody that's in a fight is basically a fighter. So I chose to use the word warrior. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is show you. I'm going to pick a human, and I'm going to pick a wizard, because they have some requirements, minimum requirements that you need in order to create this character. So the way this is going to work is you will, by default, if there's no class requirements, have 100 points to assign to various attributes. You can see I only have 40 right now. The wizard as a human has dropped me all the way down to 40. So I've lost 60 points. And the reason is humans start with a minimum of 80 in all these attributes. The maximum they can reach in a given attribute is 120. And so the requirement for the wizard was 110 intelligence and 100 wisdom and 90 creativity. So that automatically hogged up those attributes. As you can see, I can't go below that. But anyway, I could use up the rest of my points on whatever other attributes I have here assigned. But let's talk about some of these. So strength is what you would typically think of, and I have a list of different attributes in the code here I'm going to bring up so I can look at some of the comments. So strength is essentially the ability to exert force, and it's going to drastically affect damage and impact your stamina, and minorly it'll impact your hit points. We have Constitution, which is essentially your health, your physical health or hit point level. It's really the physical structure or the body structure of the creature. So some life forms, and that's based a lot on your race, will determine how tough you are because of whether they have, thick skin, scales, the bone structure, the amount of muscle mass, all that impacts something like Constitution. Then we have Vitality, which is different than Constitution. That's the ability to survive, fight off disease, health rate, avoid death, etc. Now, one thing that's different in my game than other games that I've played is there are quite a few health systems. So I've decided to go with the term physical health instead of hit points, because hit points is an old term that's been brought forward from Dungeons and Dragons, and it's related, to points and rolling and things of that nature. Physical health is essentially your hit points, and it's affected by things like physical attacks, acid, fire, cold, etc. Anything that's going to cause physical damage to your body. Then we have mental health, which is related to your sanity, your morale, and things of that nature. So psionics, for example, would attack that type of system. There's various ways to actually defeat or incapacitate a life form, and depending on what type it is, it has these different systems. So anything that would have a mind would have mental health. If it doesn't have a mind, it's not going to have mental health. So it would be useless to try to attack a system of that type. Nervous system health. So that's affected by various attacks like shock, electricity. Sometimes cold has an impact on your nervous system. Chemicals that are introduced into the body, etc. You then have circulatory system health, which are affected by things like poison, again, cold, sometimes too much heat, acid, drugs, etc. Respiratory system health, which is drowning, toxic air, smoke, again, cold, heat, etc. And then you have stamina, just like you have in Wizardry series, Wizardry 6, 7, and 8. And that's affected by performing actions or taking damage of certain types may affect your stamina. Now, these various systems will all have various effects when they reach 0. So, for example, physical health, when it reaches 0, you die. The nervous system, when it reaches 0, you may become paralyzed. So, or fall into a coma. So there's various things that'll happen based on the health of these systems. The reason why I wanted to bring that up first before I go back to these attributes is because some of these attributes, like vitality, affect different types. Okay. So, as I was saying, vitality affects nervous system, circulatory system, and respiratory system health. Whereas, as you remember, the constitution attribute affects your physical health. Next, we have endurance. So that affects your stamina level and recovery. It also affects your respiratory and circulatory system health. We have will, which is essentially willpower. That's the ability to continue performing a task when the odds are overwhelming. It also influences how well one can survive shock or stress. So this also affects mental health. And some of these are also going to affect many, many skills, which I'm not going to talk about skills during this video very much, but there's a big impact on actions and things as well. Okay, so all of those are what I would call kind of physical health and capacities, but we also have a few here. We have speed, agility, and dexterity. Now, speed is the ability to move and how quickly. So it affects things like your movement speed, and it can slightly increase your damage and the number of swings or attacks you get in combat, for example. Agility is different. That's the ability to rapidly change position in the body and with less effort. So that largely affects the number of attacks you get, and it has a decent impact on your combat initiative and a small impact on stamina loss. And finally, we have dexterity, and that's the ability to perform fine movements with accuracy, and it affects your chance to hit with a given attack. And all this is subject to change. This is just what I have for the moment. Now, intelligence is actually kind of split up into what I would call 5 areas. So the first one is just a generic intelligence. And that is the difficulty level to understand new concepts, skills, or spells, including linguistics, how much memory you have, how quickly you can gain knowledge, and at what capacity. So that affects your mental health. Logic. So logic is the ability to solve problems with reasoning ability, and it also affects your mathematics ability. Creativity. That's the ability to come up with ideas and invent and outwit someone. This will also impact things such as inventions or creating items and various skills. Wisdom. So that's the ability to make wise decisions and know which decisions are bad. There's going to be a warning type system built in where you will become aware of things that are dangerous or potentially catastrophic based on your wisdom. And if you don't have high wisdom, then you may not be warned of those things. But that's just an example. There's probably going to be more to wisdom than that. But essentially it's knowledge of nature and common sense as well. Then we have empathy. Empathy is the ability to communicate and appreciate others and their intentions. It affects spells and actions that can help others. So that would be a good thing for priests, for example, or ones wanting to help others. There's also an attribute called spirituality. As I mentioned, the main plot of this game is the gods have created this universe for their own entertainment. And your spirituality will affect how much interaction or appreciation you get from the gods. So this is going to be a very interesting ability, and I'll talk about that more in the future. But anyone calling upon godly type abilities, like good or bad, like necromancers, they deal with the dead and skeletons and undead and things of that nature, that they will need spirituality. Shaman, they also do some unholy spirituality related things. But then you have others like priests and bishops who may deal with the gods that are more holy. Regardless, it's just called spirituality because there are different types of gods in the game. Okay, then we have confidence. That's full trust or belief in powers, trustworthiness, or reliability of a person or thing. The ability to face situations that may cause others to be afraid or overwhelmed. Can influence others. It affects your mental health and chance to hit. Also impacts your morale. Charisma. The ability to influence others. That's pretty straightforward. And this game is going to have a lot of non-combat related tasks that can be performed. So charisma will be very useful in this game, unlike many other RPGs. Initiative. How quickly one may make a decision to act. It affects the combat initiative as well. And then we have perception. The ability to discover things and differences. Impacts chance to hit and certain things like critical hit ability. It's also going to have a big impact on the ability to find areas throughout the universe. And boy, are there going to be a lot. You got to remember that there's not going to be a whole lot of graphics. So the way that movement is going to work in this game is very different than other games I've played. Essentially, you're going to journey off in various directions. And it's almost real time. Like I mentioned, every second of real world game time is 2 seconds in the game. And so you're just going to start walking off in given directions if you've never been that way before. And you may stumble across, maybe swamplands with some kind of hut that you want to explore. You may run into a monster lair, a special cave, a dungeon. You may run into another city. Who knows? Just, it's all going to be a vast universe and it's all going to be laid out there, but you will have to discover this stuff. So perception will help with that ability. Okay, so this is the character creation process, what I have so far. Then you're going to have skills, which of course there's going to be all kinds of them. In fact, let me go over to the code and see what else I could maybe show here. If I have anything else interesting worth showing. Okay, yeah, let's talk about quest types. I plan on having many, many types of quests. And these are what I'm going to call hierarchical in nature. And what I mean by that is there's a certain base type of quest, like rescuing a life form. A more specific example might be rescuing a princess. And I'm going to come up with all kinds of different scenarios of these types and how they're going to work. But I'll talk about some of the base types here. destroying a life form, delivering an item somewhere, delivering information somewhere. Diplomacy. There may be quests where you have to be a diplomat and make friends between various groups. You may need a quest to just receive information or sneak information. The difference there is you have to get information from someone without being seen or heard. And there are different actions you're going to be doing in this game, all impacted by various things like sense of smell, sense of hearing, sense of sight, which all impact things like that. Maybe there's a quest to receive an item or find an item. So maybe you just have to find the item and you don't have to give it back to the quest grantor. You just find the item and show it to him. Maybe you have to create an item. So let's say you are a crafter and someone wants you to make a suit of armor for him. That's an example of that. Maybe you need to invent an item that has not been created yet. I want to try to talk about that briefly, but before I get to that, let's keep going on these. Maybe you need to create a building or destroy a building, repair an item. So items in this game will have structure points, and they will deteriorate over time as well. So that's going to be one aspect to deal with. Maybe you have to cast a certain spell on a life form. Who knows what that is? Maybe it's an attack type spell, like someone wants you to poison someone, or maybe charm someone, or maybe heal them. Maybe you need to cast a spell on an item, or cast a spell at a certain location. Like maybe there's a house that's haunted, and you need to cast some type of uncursed spell on there. Maybe you need to invoke an item on a life form, like some type of poison, for example, or maybe curse them. Maybe you need to escort a life form somewhere. It's kind of like a bodyguard. And then there's more specifics like healing wounds, curing disease, curing blindness, giving food or items or drinks to someone, giving shelter. Maybe you just have to find a building or find a location. Or destroy a location, which is different than a building. It could be a monster's lair and you have to destroy the whole thing. Maybe you need to destroy an item. Think of Lord of the Rings, where you destroy a ring. You need to give a certain amount of money or visit a location. Maybe you have to locate an item and just find out where it's at, or locate a life form. Maybe you need to seize a person. Example, that'd be something a bounty hunter would do, where they force someone into their control. Many types of seizing. Money, items, ships, money. Maybe you have to steal items or ships. Teaching skills to someone, teaching a spell. Or maybe you just have to train a certain skill on your party member to a certain level. Once you do that, the quest is completed. Self-improvement type quests, like increasing an attribute. I'm also going to have things like random acts of kindness. And I mentioned here, I'm not really sure how I'm going to implement that, but I will figure out a way. Use a skill at a location, or use a skill in a life form. Use skill on an item, learn a skill, perform an action at a location. For example, you prayed or you jumped there or whatever. There's going to be many kinds of actions you can do. Perform an action on a life form. Maybe attack or pickpocket them or whatever. Or maybe you just have to attend an event. For example, was the party present during a wedding? If you were, maybe that was what you need to do to complete the quest. So as you can see, quest is a very generic term. And there's going to be many different types. And I'm sure I'll come up with more. Okay, so repairing items, I mentioned earlier that they have structure points and things of that nature. And that you can create them. if you have certain abilities. I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Basically, I have something called magic effects, and it's separate from spells. Let me try to find some of the code for magic effects. I'll just do a search here. Okay. So there's various types of effects. And again, these are hierarchical in nature, where there's a parent and child relationship. For example, resistance types of temperature or fire. Fire is a child of temperature. So there's all kinds of different resistances in the game. Cutting, crushing, piercing, bleeding, dismemberment. You can see the list is huge. Light, deaf, electric, ice, etc. All those may apply to various magic effects. High-level magic effects like damage, heal, armor, teleport. I'm going to have teleport ability to get around in the world. Maybe something modifies an attribute. Increases armor, decreases, curses an item, imbues an item. You can see there's all these different kinds of magic effects. Here's physical damage, which is a child of damage. Even more specific, cut damage, which is a child of physical damage. And then we get into things like melee defense pierce damage. And what that is a magic effect where if you take magic, or if you take melee damage that happens to be piercing type, this is a defense toward that. So these magic effects are going to be very specific or very generic. So when you create items or invent them, you'll be able to combine these, and they can actually have multiple effects. And spells are the same way. There's going to be the ability to potentially create spells. And I'm going to have, of course, a whole bunch of canned spells, but you'll be able to create your own as well. And so by combining a bunch of these different things, when I get them completed, you'll be able to make all kinds of different things. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So anyway, I think that's all I'm going to talk about for now. I'll talk about more in the future as the game progresses and I get more done. But I just want to introduce you to some of these concepts, and I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any comments, please make them. If you would like to potentially participate and volunteer, the types of volunteers I'm looking for is artwork right now and sound. So again, I'm going to make the game regardless of if I have any graphics or sound, but I do plan on at least having some. Let me show you real quick before I leave here. I'm going to log in and continue a game just to show you what I'm talking about. So for example, here is City Hall. So I have some graphics for that. And as you move, and you can ignore the layout right now of all this. This is just in works to test out the game engine. But you'll be able to perform various actions. Like here I'm going to go west. And as you can see, it just flipped to a different location. So now I'm in the city of Springfield. And here's my position in the game world. So it would be nice to have graphics like this, static graphics. And I do have some sound that I'm going to incorporate, as you can hear. So I want to have some background and try to introduce things of that nature. Maybe have some music. So if you are skilled in either creating two-dimensional graphics like this, and I want them to be drawing oriented. Think Darklands, think graphics like this. That would be great. And then again, sound. If you have the ability to create sound effects that I could use, I'm looking for HTML5 type sound like MP3. That'd be fantastic. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and I will share more information in the future. I'll see you next time.